The headlines on major news networks suggest that the regime change in Venezuela is a unilateral victory for the United States. But if you peel back the layers of political rhetoric and look at the hard economic reality, you find a startling paradox. While Washington is orchestrating the coup, the true strategic beneficiary, the nation hitting a double geopolitical jackpot, is actually India. This assertion might seem counterintuitive, perhaps even controversial, but the data does not lie. Let me walk you through the evidence, step by step. To understand this double lottery, we must first deconstruct the motive. Why has the United States initiated this maximum pressure campaign now? The answer, undeniably, is crude oil. Venezuela possesses the largest proven oil reserves on the planet. We're talking about the Orinoco Belt, reserves that dwarf those of Saudi Arabia, Russia, and even the United States. President Trump has been explicit in his intent. He views these reserves as a critical asset to be seized and monetized. But here's the technical catch that changes the entire geopolitical calculus. Extraction is not the same as utilization. You cannot simply pull Venezuelan crude out of the ground and pump it into a Ford F-150. This is not the light, sweet crude found in West Texas. This is extra heavy, sour crude. It's a viscous, tar-like substance with incredibly high sulfur content and heavy metal density. Processing this requires highly specialized downstream infrastructure. Think of it in terms of metallurgy. You cannot process high-grade titanium in a basic iron forge. Similarly, you cannot refine this Venezuelan sludge in a standard refinery designed for light Saudi oil. The chemical composition requires specific catalysts, toker units, and high-complexity metallurgy to prevent corrosion. Decades of U.S. sanctions have created a global infrastructure gap. Because Venezuela was a pariah state, Western nations stopped investing in the complex refineries needed to process its oil. Today, the global capacity to handle this specific feedstock is concentrated in very few hands. And this is where India holds the ace card. India possesses the world's most sophisticated refinery complex for heavy crude. In terms of sheer volume and technical complexity, New Delhi is the undisputed global leader. India can process approximately 3 million barrels per day of this specific heavy crude. Let's look at the numbers. Venezuela's own domestic refining capacity has collapsed to barely 800,000 barrels due to decay. The United States? They currently have a capacity of merely 200 to 300,000 barrels per day for this specific import mix. The rest of the world is a rounding error. India sits at 3 million. There is no competition. This creates an inescapable strategic dependency. Even if the United States controls the oil fields militarily, they cannot monetize the product without India's industrial capacity. The crude is financially worthless until it is refined. Therefore, the supply chain is inevitable. Venezuelan oil will be extracted under U.S. supervision, but it must be routed to Indian refineries. India becomes the critical node in the global energy map. The roadmap for the next few quarters is clear. Once a pro-American administration is installed in Caracas, sanctions relief will be granted. Washington will take a commission on the sales, but India will become the primary buyer and refiner. New Delhi will likely replicate the arbitrage strategy we saw with Russian oil, buying the heavy crude at a discount, refining it, and exporting the diesel and jet fuel to the global market at a premium. But I mentioned a double lottery. Here is the second layer of the windfall. Years ago, Indian state-owned enterprises invested billions in foreign direct investment into Venezuelan oil fields. That capital became trapped, essentially classified as distressed assets, because the Maduro regime, crippled by sanctions and insolvency, refused to pay dividends or return principal. New Delhi has been demanding these funds back for years, to no avail. With a regime change and the normalization of financial ties, those frozen assets will finally be unlocked. India will not only recover its sunk costs, but secure lucrative future contracts. Now, critics might ask, why doesn't the US simply build its own refineries? It is not that simple. You cannot build a Nelson Complexity Index refinery overnight. Look at the Jamnagar refinery in India, the largest in the world. Facilities like this take a decade to build and billions in capital expenditure, CapEx. Even with unlimited resources, the lead time for the US to build similar capacity is 8 to 10 years. Washington has no viable short-term alternative. They need New Delhi now. The timeline is accelerated. The Venezuelan Supreme Court has mandated elections within 30 days. We are looking at a transitional window of roughly 3 to 6 months before a new administration is seated and sanctions are formally lifted. Once that happens, Venezuelan heavy crude floods the market. In the final geopolitical consequence, as this oil reaches Indian refineries, New Delhi's reliance on Russian Urals will diminish. India will have a viable, cheaper alternative, fundamentally altering the energy leverage Moscow currently holds over the Asian market. India wins on pricing, India wins on strategic autonomy, and India wins on profit. That is the definition of realpolitik.